Judge Prescott thought he could silence Pam Bondi with a fine, but he never expected her to dismantle his entire argument right there in the courtroom. The courthouse in Tampa, Florida, had seen its fair share of legal battles, but on this particular morning, no one could have predicted the storm that was about to unfold. Pam Bondi, sharp as ever, stepped through the heavy wooden doors, briefcase in one hand, the other adjusting the lapel of her blazer. She was here for what should have been a routine hearing, one she could argue in her sleep. As she made her way to the defendant's table, she felt Judge Alan Prescott's eyes on her, even before he spoke. A man known for his no-nonsense demeanor, Prescott wasn't staring at her face, but rather at something just below her collarbone, a simple gold cross. The air in the courtroom shifted, a quiet stillness descended, and then in a tone as sharp as a gavel strike, Prescott cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Miss Bondi, I must remind you that religious symbols have no place in my courtroom." Pam barely blinked. "Your Honor, you're wearing a cross. That violates the neutrality of this space," Prescott said. "You'll need to remove it or face a fine." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, and the clerk darted a glance from the judge to Pam. This wasn't the first time a judge had tried to assert control over his courtroom in an unusual way, but it was the first time anyone had been fined for wearing jewelry. Pam didn't move. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but my cross is no different than a wedding ring or a locket with a family photo inside." Judge Prescott's face remained unreadable. "That's not how I see it." He sighed, already growing tired of the discussion. "Either remove it, or I'll have to issue a fine for disregarding courtroom neutrality." For the first time in her career, Pam Bondi found herself fined, not for misconduct, not for a procedural violation, but for wearing a piece of jewelry. But it wasn't about the fine. It was what it represented. She didn't take off the cross. Instead, she folded her hands over her briefcase, her expression cool, showing no sign of backing down. She wasn't about to let this go. "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to address this issue formally." Judge Prescott raised a brow. "Address it?" "Yes. I'll be filing an objection and would like to state my argument on record." Prescott smirked, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Miss Bondi, I'm sure you're aware that this hearing is about a business dispute, not your personal grievances." Pam didn't flinch. "I'm also aware that the First Amendment doesn't take a recess for personal opinions." That got his attention. Prescott leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard. The room was now on edge, not because of a legal battle over a contract, but because a seasoned attorney had just challenged a judge's authority to his face. Pam knew she was walking a thin line, but backing down wasn't an option. "You're finding me for wearing a cross? Let's break that down legally, shall we?" The judge exhaled, rubbing his temples, but before he could respond, Pam was already reaching into her briefcase. She wasn't just going to argue, she was about to dismantle his entire premise. Judge Prescott didn't realize just how deep of a hole he had started digging for himself. Pam pulled out a single sheet of paper from her briefcase, placing it carefully on the table in front of her. She didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate. Every second of silence was another tightening of the tension in the room. Judge Prescott sighed. "Ms. Bondi, I don't have time for theatrics." Pam didn't blink. "Neither do I, Your Honor. But what I do have is a firm understanding of constitutional law." The judge leaned forward, fingers laced together, bracing for whatever was coming next. "You're finding me for wearing a cross, claiming it violates courtroom neutrality. But tell me, Your Honor, what legal precedent are you basing that on?" The room went silent. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys. The bailiff barely shifted in his seat. Judge Prescott let out a slow breath. "This courtroom operates under my authority, Ms. Bondi." Pam nodded. "It does. But that authority is not above the Constitution." She tapped the paper in front of her. "And under the First Amendment, personal religious expression is protected, especially when it does not disrupt proceedings." The judge scoffed. "You're an attorney, not a law professor." Pam smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then let's talk case law, shall we?" She picked up the paper. Tinker versus Des Moines, 1969. A landmark case that established that individuals do not shed their constitutional rights when they enter a government institution, whether that's a school or a courtroom. Judge Prescott's jaw tightened just slightly. He knew that case. Everyone in the legal field did. Pam didn't stop. West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, 1943. The Supreme Court ruled that compelling individuals to remove or hide symbols of personal belief is a violation of their First Amendment rights. She set the paper down. "Now, Your Honor, would you like me to keep going, or would you prefer to reconsider that fine?" The judge's fingers tapped against the armrest of his chair. He was cornered and he knew it. But his pride wouldn't let him concede, not yet. "This is not a religious debate, Miss Bondi." Pam tilted her head. "Then why did you make it one?" A few quiet gasps broke out in the courtroom. Judge Prescott's face darkened. His voice was sharp, but his authority was slipping. Pam leaned forward, voice steady. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'll stop when I receive a legal justification for this fine. Because so far, I haven't heard one." There was a long pause. Finally, the judge looked at the clerk. "Mark the fine as pending review." Pam smirked. "I'll take that as a temporary victory." But she wasn't done yet. The real fight was just beginning. Judge Prescott's face remained unreadable, but there was no mistaking the way he shifted in his chair. He had expected quiet compliance, not a full-blown constitutional challenge. The air in the courtroom was no longer just tense, it was electric. Pam could feel it. Every set of eyes was glued to her, watching, waiting. She had drawn a line in the sand, and now the judge had two choices: stand by his weak justification and risk humiliation, or find a way to backtrack without losing control. But Prescott wasn't one to back down easily. "Miss Bondi," he began, his tone measured. "Courtroom rules exist for a reason. If I allow one form of personal expression, I open the door to all of them." Pam's lips pressed together. "You mean like the wedding bands worn by half the attorneys here? Or the lapel pins you allow on government officials?" Prescott's jaw tightened. Pam didn't let up. "Or let's talk about the time you allowed a defense attorney to wear a pink ribbon for breast cancer awareness during a trial. You had no issue with that." A few quiet murmurs broke out among the observers. Prescott shot a glare toward them, but the damage was already done. Pam had just exposed his selective enforcement. She sat back, crossing her arms. "So tell me, Your Honor, why does this rule apply only to my cross?" Prescott's fingers curled around the edge of his desk. He was trapped, and everyone in that courtroom could see it. He had enforced an unwritten rule based on personal bias, and now it was crumbling beneath him. For the first time since the hearing began, he didn't have a response. Pam didn't need to gloat. She just let the silence stretch long enough for everyone to absorb the reality of the situation. Then she delivered the final blow. "If you stand by this fine, Your Honor, I will be filing an appeal before the ink dries on the ruling. And when that happens, I guarantee this case will make headlines." She let that sink in. A sitting judge finding a woman for wearing a cross in court? I'm sure the higher courts would love to weigh in on that precedent. Prescott's nostrils flared. His ego and pride were fighting a war against cold, hard reality. Pam didn't look away. She let him sit with it. The longer he delayed, the more obvious his mistake became. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he exhaled sharply. "The fine is rescinded," he muttered. Pam smiled. "Much appreciated, Your Honor." But this wasn't just about a fine anymore. She had just sent a message loud and clear. One that Prescott wouldn't forget anytime soon. The fallout was only just beginning. The judge's words, "the fine is rescinded," should have ended it. But the courtroom was no longer just a legal battleground. It had become a spectacle. Everyone present had just witnessed something they weren't likely to forget. The court reporter barely looked up from her keyboard, but even she knew this transcript would circulate beyond that room. The clerk, who had initially looked uneasy when the fine was announced, now stole a quick glance at Pam, almost as if impressed. Judge Prescott shifted in his chair, straightening his papers as if he could physically erase the moment. But Pam knew better. This wasn't something he could brush aside. The silence was deafening. Pam calmly adjusted her blazer, the weight of what had just transpired sinking in. The courtroom was no longer just a place for legal proceedings. It was a battleground for ideas, and today the law had just won. The silence lingered in the courtroom for a few moments before the sound of the judge clearing his throat broke it. "Let's proceed with the hearing," Judge Prescott said, his voice noticeably less confident than before. Pam didn't flinch. She simply nodded, standing up straighter as she adjusted the papers in front of her. Her hands were steady. Nothing in her demeanor suggested she had just gone head-to-head with a judge who had attempted to silence her for wearing a cross. It was as if the courtroom had become her stage, and she had just delivered her lines flawlessly. The tension had shifted. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about principle, about standing firm in the face of authority, and about reminding everyone in that room, especially the judge, that the law wasn't something that could be twisted or bent to personal preference. As the case proceeded, Pam's arguments remained as sharp as ever, but now there was an added weight behind them. Everyone knew what had just happened. They had just witnessed a quiet revolution in the courtroom, a reminder that no one was above the law, not even a judge. The hearing continued, but Pam was no longer just the lawyer representing her client. She was the one who had taken a stand and made history in that room. Every word she spoke carried more authority now, as if the courtroom itself had witnessed the breaking of a barrier, and everyone knew that things wouldn't quite be the same anymore. By the end of the day, the case was settled in her favor. It wasn't just because of the legal arguments she presented, but because of the force of character she had shown in the face of adversity. As Pam gathered her things and prepared to leave the courtroom, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about the fine that had been rescinded or the legal victory won. It was about something bigger, the quiet, relentless pursuit of justice. She had stood her ground when others might have cowered, and in doing so, she had sent a message that would resonate far beyond the courthouse. As she stepped out into the hallway, the whispers of the people who had witnessed it all followed her, but she didn't let them distract her. Pam Bondi had just proved that standing up for what was right was always worth it, no matter the cost. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a force to be reckoned with. And the law? It was stronger than ever. The fallout from this case would be discussed for years to come, but for Pam, it was just another day in the pursuit of truth. After all, she knew that sometimes, the most significant victories were the ones that didn't show up in any case file, but in the quiet shift of power that took place when justice had been served. Pam Bondi paused, taking a deep breath before continuing her impassioned speech. The courtroom was silent, every eye on her as she navigated the emotional and legal complexities of the case. "You see," Pam began, her voice growing more confident as she spoke, "this case is not about one person's right to wear a cross in public. It's not even about the specific laws of this city or the fine that was issued. This case is about the heart of our Constitution. It is about the principles that define what it means to be an American: freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and the right to stand up against oppression, no matter how subtly it may present itself." She took a step forward, looking directly at Judge Prescott. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is not a matter of local ordinances. This is a matter of human dignity. A matter of ensuring that every person, regardless of where they live or what they believe, has the right to express their faith publicly without fear of retribution or punishment." The judge shifted in his seat, but Pam could see that he was listening. She wasn't sure whether it was the sheer force of her words or the way she'd framed the argument, but something seemed to resonate. Pam turned her attention back to the jury, locking eyes with each of them for a brief moment before continuing. "Let's think about the implications here. If we allow this ruling to stand, if we allow this government to tell its citizens when and where they can express their religion, we are opening the door to a future where the rights of the individual are secondary to the whims of the state. This isn't a future that we should be comfortable with." Her pacing slowed as she moved toward the bench, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "We have fought long and hard to protect the rights of individuals in this country. We have fought to ensure that no person is silenced, no belief is repressed, and no one is made to feel inferior because of their faith. Today we have a chance to protect those principles once again." She paused, letting her words sink in. The weight of the moment was heavy. The room was still, save for the sound of the fan overhead and the soft shuffle of papers on the table. Pam could feel the tension in the air, the decision that was about to be made hanging over everyone in the room like a cloud. The opposing counsel, Greg Hartley, adjusted his glasses and stood up, his turn to speak. He tried to inject a sense of calm into his tone, but his voice was laced with frustration. "Your Honor, while we respect the defendant's right to express her faith, we must consider the broader implications of allowing such symbols in public spaces. The city's ordinances are in place to maintain order, to prevent any disruptions. It's not about suppressing religious expression, it's about maintaining a sense of neutrality in public places." Pam turned to face him, not even bothering to hide the disbelief on her face. "Neutrality? Mr. Hartley, what you are advocating for is a form of quiet censorship. The city's ordinance does not foster neutrality, it fosters repression. It says that unless your expression fits within the confines of what is deemed acceptable by a small group of bureaucrats, you must hide who you are. And that is not what this country stands for." She turned back to Judge Prescott, her voice firm and unwavering. "We must not allow laws that undermine our very right to be individuals in this country. We must protect that freedom at all costs. This isn't just about one woman and her right to wear a cross. This is about all of us. This is about whether we, as a nation, continue to uphold the principles of freedom that have made us the beacon of hope for so many around the world." Judge Prescott leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed for a moment as he processed her words. The tension in the courtroom was nearly palpable. Pam could feel the weight of history in the air, and for a moment she thought she might faint under the pressure. But she steadied herself, knowing that she had to remain strong, not just for her client but for the ideals she had spent her entire career defending. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the judge spoke, his voice low and contemplative. "This is indeed a difficult case, Ms. Bondi. The balance between individual rights and the laws of the land is one we must always take great care in considering. But I will say this, what you've presented today is a reminder of why we have a constitution. A reminder that it is the duty of our courts to protect the freedoms of every citizen, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges the status quo." There was a pause. Pam held her breath, waiting for the ruling. "The court will take a brief recess," Judge Prescott continued. "I need time to consider all arguments presented before making a final decision." As the judge stood and the gavel fell, signaling the brief recess, Pam could feel her heart racing. She had made her case. She had spoken from the heart, appealing not just to the law but to the very principles that made this country great. Now all she could do was wait. She turned to her client, offering a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," she said softly. "We've got this. Whatever happens next, we fought the good fight." Her client, though still visibly nervous, nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Bondi. I don't know what would have happened without you." Pam smiled, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about winning a case. This was about something bigger. It was about ensuring that the freedom to express one's faith was never silenced, not on her watch. As the recess continued, Pam found herself sitting in quiet reflection. The outcome of this case could very well set a precedent that would affect future generations. But no matter what the judge decided, she knew she had done everything she could to stand up for the right thing. And that, in itself, was a victory.